और इसके अलावा रूरल, अर्बन, इंग्लिश मीडियम, उर्दू मीडियम, अदर लैंग्वेज वाइज, एरिया वाइज, और सेक्युलर, रिलीजियस। तो ये सारी वो एरियाज हैं जिसके जरिए से आप टाइप्स ऑफ स्कूल को आइडेंटिफाई कर सकते हैं। ऐसा क्या है जिसमें हम टाइप्स ऑफ स्कूल्स को थॉरली हमें समझने की जरूरत है। Why it is important? Why it is important to know about types of school? So that's very important question to address. So basically, there are different classifications depending upon the interest of areas. For example, if we say the public schools and private schools, this is one of the classification. You classify schools on the basis of their identity, like public schools and private schools. In public schools, most of the arrangements from public is done. For example, public is responsible to construct a school, hire staff, and allocate fund for that school to provide education, free education. Mostly in public schools, the concept is to provide free education. That is the responsibility of the public, responsibility of the government. So the government acquires the land and builds a school equipped with all required resources in the school, provide the teachers and other staff members in order to facilitate, in order to provide free education to the people. So this is one of the concepts that public school is all about. Whereas in the areas where public cannot provide that level of school to every child, in those areas, some private sectors come up with the concept of facilitating government, providing education to the children. So the private sector plays its role. So in this way, we can understand the type of schools as public schools and private schools. There are many things which you can further when we go deeper and deeper. There are many good things at the public sector schools, and as well as some weak points. Similarly, in the private, there are again and pros and cons of these two types of the schools. That depends upon how this public sector school is providing a quality education to the public, to the people, to the population. Whereas the private sector is always looking at those areas where public is lacking something. For example, public schools, mostly in the developing countries like Pakistan, take example of Gilgit-Baltistan, there are many public schools, but in some of those public schools, the quality of teaching and learning is very low as compared to some other private schools. But this is not the generalized case. In some of the public schools, there are highly qualified teachers. They have rich resources in the school, and the teaching learning is going on very well. So we cannot generalize. But normally, when we look at the another type of the schools, within the public and private, there are some urban schools and some rural schools. In urban schools, there are again many areas which we can consider because urbanization. There are many competitors in private schools. So the government is focusing on those schools to improve the resources, to improve the quality of teaching and learning, to in this way, these urban schools as compared to rural schools are better. So similarly, when we look at these rural schools, in most of the rural schools of the public schools, there are lack of resources, including non-availability of the teaching staff as well. So in those schools, for example, when I give you an example of a primary school in a village. So there are hardly two or three rooms, and within those 2 to 3 rooms, a primary school from grade 1 to grade 5 is running in public sector. So similarly, now the situation is not so good in private sector as well. Similarly, they have limited resources. They have their rented buildings in some of the private schools, and they operate schools in rented residential buildings. So they have lack of resources. They have no playground and other type of facilities like library, labs, etc. So these play a significant role in enhancing or decreasing the quality of teaching and learning in the schools. So we need to understand the types of schools, not in a generalized way, but the types of school in order to look at how those schools provide facilities to learners. Because when we talk about school improvement, our focus is on improving student learning. So we need to look at what kind of the resources, what kind of the teaching learning practices which are there in a school, which play a significant role to improve teaching learning conditions of the learners. So when we look at another aspect of types of school, which classifies improving school, struggling school, and sinking school, etc. So in the next lecture, we will thoroughly discuss on those type of school, and we link with the concept of school improvement, how those linking schools, how those sinking schools, how those struggling schools, how those improving schools, and how those improved schools have some characteristics which we can understand. Yes, these are the types of school which make a difference for improving teaching learning conditions of the learner. So in the next lecture, hopefully we will thoroughly discuss this particular dimension as well.